Welcome into another episode of the College Football Insiders. I'm your host, Richard Johnson. I am joined by John Talty and Chris Hummer for the moment. We'll see if Matt Zenitz ends up gracing us with his commanding presence. You guys see my guy put up 315 on the bench today? We'll get to it when he hops on the show. We are dealing with still the fallout of what has continued and promises to be one of the craziest coaching cycles that any of the three of us have been a part of or ever will be a part of, to be quite frank. It essentially came out of nowhere as far as the specific timing is concerned. Sunday afternoon's announcement that James Franklin is out as Penn State's head coach. It's wild to me as someone who stood like 10 yards away from James Franklin as he sung the alma mater 2.5 weeks ago after the Oregon game, where, jokes aside, like, they were really close in that game to winning it. Obviously, it was in overtime. And then you fast forward 2 weeks and he's out of the job after two subsequent of the most embarrassing losses Penn State has had, certainly under him, but in quite some time, regardless of whether he was the head coach. Guys, the fallout over this, let's start, before we start to talk candidates, all that kind of stuff, let's talk about the fallout from the people that we talked to. Like, because as much of a surprise, I should say, as it was for me personally, like, the people that I talked to, at least in the industry, say it was a surprise too, John. I don't know if you've heard similar.
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. I think that's something that it just felt like it happened so quickly, just in general, to your point, Richard, that, they're a play or two away from winning that game, maybe being the number one team in the country and still playing for what we expected them to be doing this year, which is, compete for a national championship. So it's just, I think, just how small, these little things can be in terms of being the guy to being out of a job. But it's interesting. It's one of those kind of the what ifs, and I don't know the answer to this question, but like, if they beat Northwestern, is this fine? Like, Pat Kraft kind of made it seem like this has been building, but
John, I like, Pat Kraft kind of made it sound like it was pretty impulsive to me during his press conference on Monday afternoon. Like, it sounded like they lost to Northwestern, and yeah, he said, like, okay, it had been building, but again, to your point, like, I don't think he does this if they lose that game.
I don't think so either. And I mean, you get a lot of, now they tell us in retrospect things coming out of these firings. And I don't know if y'all have heard the same, but I don't know if James Franklin and Pat Kraft always saw eye to eye, like, coming out of this. And that certainly adds to, it helps explain a little bit about what happened here. And I mean, in James Franklin's defense, and this is like something I heard from a source yesterday, like, they're really, like, the source said straight up, there aren't 10 coaches in the country better than James Franklin. So we'll see if we'll get into the candidates here in a second, but a couple of people I've talked to have said, careful what you wish for about this move. And if you're going to make this move, you better get somebody better than James Franklin. I don't think that's a guarantee, but yeah, based on the people I talked to, it did, for me at least, it seemed like a surprise. Like, nobody was expecting James Franklin to get fired on Sunday. Like, I talked about this on our emergency pod, but I remember being on the phone with an agent and we were talking about, like, something imminent happening at Penn State, and we both thought it would be a coordinator. And then we see our guy Matt Zenitz breaking the news that it's actually James Franklin. So I don't think many people across college football expected this to happen. And it's still, like, even 2 days later, I think it's the most shocking firing of the 21st century when you consider everything that goes with it. And the team Penn State was, it's wild.
Yeah, and to your point, Chris, I have heard James was not the easiest guy to manage from a few different people. And I think what I talked to someone about this the other day, and it's one of those things where it's like, if you're winning, who cares? Like, you guys know, a lot of coaches are hard to manage. A lot of the guys who win the most have the most demands. But I mean,
John Talty is hard to manage. You see this guy just coming on here with a hat, like, ridiculous. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, just talk to our boss. He'll probably say the same. But I think, like, when it starts to lose, then those things almost feel amplified of, like, man, this guy is, like, not the easiest guy to deal with, and we're not winning. Like, do I want to put up with this? So, again, like you said, Chris, like, anytime somebody gets fired, the stuff that maybe was bubbling beneath the surface all of a sudden starts coming out, and it helps explain the spin as to why not to make a move. But I heard something similar in the last couple of days, that some of this, maybe that was part of the building of, like, James is constantly making demands, constantly not whining, but wanting more, and that can sometimes lead to friction with your bosses.
Very publicly wanting more sometimes too. Like he hasn't been about asking for things, and that's the type of leverage you have when you're winning and you're winning at a high level. And those things can get very irritating when you lose to UCLA and Northwestern in back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, I think that I understand that it is very easy to take James Franklin's career record or recent record, the positive version of it, and say, how can you fire this guy? How can you get rid of this guy? It's as good as it's going to get, et cetera. But because of the disparities in the sport, we understand why his record against everybody else was what it was. But it's the dual nature of, obviously, losing the games that you are a toss-up against Oregon and losing to Northwestern UCLA. Because you say what you want about James Franklin, he hasn't lost those games. He has not lost any of those games in the last few years. Like, they take care of business. And when you pull that block out of the Jenga tower, it all comes crashing down. Now, yes, I thought he was going to get to the end of the season. But I thought that perhaps it would have been Andy Kotelnicki on Sunday afternoon, not James Franklin. But it is fascinating that they did this now, to be honest with you. And it's interesting because what they're trying to do next is something that's pretty unprecedented. And me and John were talking about this on Sunday afternoon. Like, Oregon and Georgia are like the only teams that have ever gone, at least recently, gone from like 9.5 wins to 11.5 wins, which is pretty much what Penn State is betting that they can do here. It's hard. It's hard. And $50 million to get a guy out, even if it's over the course of a multi-year deal, I understand that, but it's still the second highest buyout in college football history. It's a lot of money. So John,
Richard,
go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, like, you're basically betting you can go from Mark Richt to Kirby Smart, right?
Yes.
You have to find your Kirby Smart. And maybe there is a Kirby Smart out there for Penn State. We shouldn't dismiss that. But the pools of Kirby Smarts are very small. Like, he is one of the 3 or 4 best coaches of this century in college football. There aren't a lot of those dudes walking out there.
Can I make a counterpoint here real fast as devil's advocate? What if it's not necessarily we're going to find our next Kirby Smart? What if it's after seeing them lose to UCLA and Northwestern, you're looking at James Franklin and you're saying, this guy just doesn't have it anymore. Maybe he does not even have the ability to keep doing what he's been doing the last couple years. Like that, he looks beaten down. They're downtrodden. We should not be losing any of these games. It's happening anyway. I'm not seeing anything. I mean, I was watching again today, watching him walk off the field. I mean, it was kind of a sad display by the end. Clearly the fan base was getting toxic in terms of them not being happy with the product. I understand everything you're saying. I don't even disagree with it, but I do wonder if it's not even just this guy has to win a title. What if it's just we think that the best days of James Franklin are behind us, and even getting back to that 10, 11 wins, probably not happening with this current version of what I'm seeing with James Franklin right now.
I guess like devil's advocate, which sounds ridiculous and probably isn't a healthy place to bring a podcast, but like, this guy was in the college football playoff semifinals last year. Like, it's not like they quit. They came back against Oregon. They came back against UCLA. It's not like the team wasn't playing hard. I understand being upset about losing to Northwestern and UCLA. I think the UCLA loss particularly is one of the worst losses we've seen in college football in a very long time. But I don't think you can argue that the players like quit on him or anything like that. It's not like he doesn't have it. Like, they were playing hard. They just weren't winning.
So what happened in Northwestern? That's the devil's advocate to the devil's advocate to the devil's advocate.
Well, I talked to a couple of people over at Northwestern that just felt like they won up front. Like, they all said that they thought Penn State played pretty hard. They just weren't good enough in the trenches. And that's a whole different conversation about James Franklin and Penn State if you want to go there. But I don't know. It seems like a rash judgment to make after 6 games. But at the end of the day, like, you're paying a guy $10 million a year to win championships, and he wasn't close. So
the question about where they go next. It's funny because, like, obviously we're reporters. This is what we do. We try to go deeper than like the common, easy message board, like Twitter names. But then Sunday afternoon, you get on the phone with people who know and who do this for a living on whether it's the agent side or others in coaching or in the administrative side. And you ask people what they're hearing, and they're like, oh yeah, like maybe Matt Rule, like Curt Cignetti. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like the pool of names that you heard from the different corners of the industry that we all talked to, and as the three of us have all talked in the last couple of days, like it's not like any of us have found a name that has been brought to us by a source that is particularly exotic as far as this go. I think some of that is due to the relative surprise nature of this. That's one of the reasons why I point back to this, like legitimately being a surprise, not just to us, but to people really inside the industry. But then, yeah, like it's interesting that like so far, and it's 48, 72 hours since it actually happened, like it doesn't seem like many people as yet have gotten past the like initial wave of like maybe Matt Rule, maybe Curt Cignetti, and then some silly names that we'll talk to. But let's start with Matt Rule and Curt Cignetti first. John and I have been Indiana beat writers the last couple weeks with Indiana's big game against Oregon last week and the bye week before that. So we sort of were writing dueling stories on the Indiana football ecosystem. Like I wrote about how Mark Cuban had invested for the first time directly to athletics because of Curt Cignetti. And I think that where both me and John, not to speak for John, but I think where I net out, and I think John agrees, is that like, I don't think Curt's going to leave for a couple reasons. And one of them is because this is not like little old Indiana. It ain't little old Indiana on the field. They just literally beat Oregon in Autzen Stadium. But it ain't little old Oregon, little old Indiana in the checkbook either, John.
Yeah, I mean, you had a great story about it last week, and I've kind of written about it. I wrote something today at CBS Sports about why he doesn't have to leave, and I think that there's just this. I think in general, it's harder to coach steal than maybe fans think it is, even just getting beyond this specific situation. But I think when you look at the various factors in which he's already making $8.3 million, he'll get a $1 million retention bonus at the end of November. So that's 9.3 right there. Given the season he's having, he's going to get more money. He can easily be 10 million, if not more. They have given him $11 million for his staff and support pool. That's one of the top in the country. I mean, it's shocking to think about. Indiana football is spending $11 million on its staff, but that helped them keep a guy like Bryant Haynes, who was a top defensive coordinator candidate for multiple different schools, kept their strength and conditioning coach. So they're able to keep the guys around him, which means a lot to Cignetti. As you guys know, he's brought these guys from IUP to Elon to James Madison, now to Indiana. So keeping his staff is critical. And they've given him the resources that are necessary to be successful. I think as long as Indiana can continue to invest the way that they are, can continue to give him the necessary rev share money, can continue to generate NIL money on top of that, then I think there's no reason that he has to leave. And again, I just go back to his track record. He has taken the off-beaten, hard journey to get to this moment. He has not been a guy who only wants to work at the most prestigious schools. I don't think he feels like he has to be at a biggest school to accomplish what he has. And if you know anything about him, like he's just got a massive chip on his shoulder. And I think that almost plays better at a non-traditional power than a place like Penn State. So clearly, Penn State, I think, will be interested in him. They will kick the tires on him. They won't be the only school to do so. But I think it's going to be very challenging to pry Curt Cignetti out of Bloomington, knowing everything they've given him. And to your point, Richard, which you made in your story, the alignment he has with the athletic director and the president, who is very heavily invested in them succeeding. You saw her celebrating on the field after the Oregon win. Like that is an administration that's very aligned right now. Gives you a lot of reasons to feel confident as an Indiana fan right now, but I'm sure it'll be a little nerve-wracking in the next couple of weeks as his name is mentioned over and over again.
The one thing, like you talk about, it's not as easy to coach steal as people make it out to be. This is back of napkin, so forgive me, but let's kind of game it out, right? You're buying out in the next calendar year. You're buying out James Franklin if you're Penn State. So you're paying him $8 million, probably plus a little bit of whatever he's got left on this. Call it 10, right? So that's $10 million for James Franklin. That's probably another 5 to buy out all of the assistants, right? So you're at 15. That's going to be around another $5 million to get the new coach, because
maybe more. I mean, Knowles is what, multi-year contract? I mean,
sure. So anyway, but just call it 5 to buy all your assistants out. It's probably more, but call it 5. That's going to be then it's going to be another 5 because the coach who you're going to go get has to pay his own buyout to the school. So you're at 20 now, and I'm being conservative with 20. Then obviously you've got to allocate staff pool. That's probably another 10 to be competitive, right? So you're at $30 million conservatively, and you have not paid a player yet, by the way. And this is a Penn State roster that you're going to have a lot of guys going to the NFL. So you're going to have to turn guys over. And if you want to be immediately competitive, which I'm sure Penn State does, that roster is going to have to be in the $20 million range, probably minimum. So you don't really have to do a lot of work to say that in the next calendar year, this cost runs you about $50 million. Like it's not that hard to get there, Chris.
I don't know why you're talking about $50 million. Like it's a lot of money, Richard. If we've learned anything in college athletics the last couple of years, $50 million is just stuff you find under the couch cushions. I'm pretty sure A&M is still like finding $5 million checks just everywhere as it pays off Jimbo. But yeah, it's not a small thing at all. But I mean, talking to people around the industry, like Penn State's prepared to pay whatever it takes. Like,
Penn State has the money. Yeah, again, Penn State has the money. I'm not trying to act like Penn State doesn't have the money. I'm more trying to put into sort of real terms like what the money really is, how much it costs.
Oh, it's expensive, and like it's fine for a Penn State. And I know we're not talking about them right now, but like there's a Wisconsin in the room right now, and like it's not a $50 million buyout, but it's a $25 million buyout, and that's like people forget. And we talked about this on Sunday. I think Shahan brought this point up, and it's a salient one. Like before Sunday, like there had only been one coach ever to have a buyout of more than $23 million. Like it's just not something that happens often in college football. And maybe the calculus changes moving forward with the money being infused into places like the Big Ten. But yeah, you're right. Like even a $25 million buyout is going to result in a school having to find an extra $25 million in the couch cushions like every year. And that's not easy for everyone to do. We
found a Matt Zenitz in the couch cushions. Matt Zenitz joins us on the College Football Insiders. Welcome to the show, my friend. Matt, the conversation that we're having is it's kind of a funny one because in the conversations that we've had with industry sources, the three of us over the last few days, the pool of candidates isn't much wider, at least in our conversations, than what's kind of out there already. It doesn't sound like, and again, early days, that there's some fancy mystery candidate. What do you think about that, Matt? And sort of in your conversations, how wide does the pool of candidates, at least in this initial stage, for where Penn State might turn go?
Well, I'm glad the discussion, first of all, didn't have anything to do with my tardiness. Got stuck on the phone longer than planned on being stuck on the phone, actually, about some NFL stuff that I was working on, and all of a sudden looked down and it's 3:55 Eastern time and realized how late I'm getting on the show. So
Matt, you have no history of like staying on the phone for a while, do you? Like no history of just like holding people.
Most of the time it's just with Chris Hummer or John Talty or Richard. In this case, just happened to be about some stuff that they're working on. But to answer your question, it's premature to make any sort of great guesses right now as far as who the hire is going to be at Penn State or any of the other current openings. So I know that we in this space love to put out the hot boards and the candidate lists and all of that. And as you guys know, to go inside baseball here a little bit, when you see those hot boards and candidate lists coming out from the media, very rarely are those based on direct communication with the AD or search firm, like right at the outset of a coach being fired or fresh off of that, about who the school is going to target. And obviously there's an interest in who could make sense, and that's more what those lists are. So in terms of Penn State specifically, John obviously is talked about Matt Rule as somebody who is going to be a possibility for that job. I don't think John is off base whatsoever in terms of Matt Rule being somebody who could make sense for that. That said, I don't think it's just a foregone conclusion as of yet that it's just going to be Matt Rule as the hire. Penn State is the caliber of job, legitimately a top 5, top 7 job in college football, wherever you want to put it, that is the type of place that should be swinging for the fences and shooting their shot at some people that would be unrealistic to get for most other schools around the country. No offense to Matt Rule. I'm not saying he's not a great coach, but that's a place that need to be swinging for the fences and exploring all your options before just settling on somebody.
Absolutely. They need to be going. That's a really good point. Like Penn State is not like every other school. It's not. And because of that, you can take some really, really big swings. We are not talking about the following couple of names as if they are serious options or if they are in any way, shape, or form down the road. Because Lord knows this is going to get clipped. So I just want to make this clear. But when you bring up names that are brought up in this type of early phase silly name cycle, you start to get like an Urban Meyer, a Marcus Freeman, a Mike Elko. Like, look, I don't think Urban Meyer is coming back to coach college football or any football. I don't think Urban Meyer would actually be very effective at coaching college football.
There's a better chance of Urban Meyer joining this podcast than there is of Urban Meyer being the next head coach at Penn State.
You don't know what kind of buyout money. You do not know what kind of buyout money producer Aaron can produce. Don't put it past my guy. But yes, I do not think Urban Meyer will be the next head coach of Penn State. But why I bring his name up, why I bring up Marcus Freeman, I bring those names up because this is to Matt's point. The caliber of job brings up a caliber of name. And that's the type of pool that we're playing in right now. And also, by the way, nature abhors a vacuum. And right now, there's a vacuum of knowledge because of how out of left field the specific timing of the firing happened. So again, if we were talking about this earlier, Matt, like you have a situation where even the sources that we all talk to, like they themselves are playing catch up on
by the way,
play with the job because they were caught off guard just like we were.
By the way, real quick, I just want to emphasize, like, especially this early in searches, never overlook how much rich people like to flex their muscles and to try to get toys that you wouldn't expect them to be able to get. Like, there are definitely people around Penn State that would love a shot at Urban Meyer if they can get him, right? It's like that's just the reality. And like, that's going to come up for a lot of these jobs. And just remember when you hear some of these like seemingly crazy names come up initially, it's because that people that donate to the football program but might not be invested in the day-to-day operation of a program or what's even realistic often bring up names that are out of left field. And that's where some of these names come from early on. So just, I would keep that in mind in some of these cases.
Do you know what's a good way of approaching this? Put yourself in the AD shoes. So with Penn State, put yourself in Pat Kraft's shoes. If you're Pat Kraft, who are you most interested in? Who do you see as the best fit for Penn State? Who are you shooting your shot at or most interested in? And look, for me, one of those types of people, if I'm Pat Kraft, that I'm at the very least inquiring about is Mike Elko. So Mike is somebody with ties to that state, graduated, if I remember correctly, from Penn.
Yes, Penn.
Has done a tremendous job at Texas A&M. I'm at least making a phone call there to just gauge the level of interest. People are going to bring up Clark Lee, who's doing a hell of a job at Vanderbilt. I just have a tough time, and it's important to keep this in mind. I have a tough time saying Vanderbilt, regardless of what Clark is doing, going back-to-back hires from Vanderbilt. So obviously that's where they got James from. I have a tough time seeing them go back to that, regardless of what Clark is doing there. And again, not to be repetitive, but this is still so early that it's tough to have a great feel on it right now. But a couple of things that like we'll share just in my conversations or from my conversations with people. This is not most likely going to be a coordinator hire. Had some people ask me about like a Dan Lynn, for example, who is doing a great job at USC, a respected name from a DC standpoint.
You're not spending $50 million to go hire a coordinator.
And that's no knock on Denton, who has himself on a great path, but this is not going to be a coordinator hire. You have coaches at the G5, G6 level, like John Summerall, Alex Golish, Ryan Silverfield, guys doing terrific job that are going to be possibilities for P4 openings this cycle. This is not going to be a G6 hire at Penn State. So whoever it is, it's going to be somebody who is a sitting Power 4 head coach right now that ends up being the guy. It's just a matter of who it is.
And I think there's two things to add on to that. One, I agree with Matt. I think out of those moonshot candidates that we were just talking about, I think Mike Elko is the most realistic of them for some of the reasons that you described. I think he was also a candidate at one point for a job at Temple when Pat Kraft was the AD there. So I think there is some familiarity there, played at Penn from Jersey, and I think the point to add with it, he's got it rolling at Texas A&M right now, but there's been a lot of administration instability there. They've gone through, I think, 5 presidents in 5 years. Trev Alberts even has like an out clause, I think, in his contract because of the most recent president change. So there could be some reason to think, hey, I've got it great here, but is there another place that's maybe more stable, closer to home? That's one factor. And second one, to Matt's point earlier, is that we just haven't seen Pat Kraft have to make a hire anywhere close to this realm of importance. He did not make a hire at Boston College. He made a couple hires at Temple. Of course, has not made a hire yet at Penn State. We just don't know that much about what he's going to do in this moment. Like we know, for instance, down at LSU, Scott Woodward wants to go big swinging. He's done it every stop he's been. He wants to get a big name. We assume Pat Kraft will do that as well. The early word, as I'm sure you guys have gotten to, they want a national championship caliber coach. That's a very small pool of people who you think can legitimately qualify as that. So we expect him to get a big name, but we just don't quite know based on his track record exactly what that might look like, the way we would with some other ADs who have more of a track record of hiring at the P4 level.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the next carousel dominoes that could fall on the College Football Insiders.
This is European soccer's biggest stage.
Written in the stars! What a difference she has made!
The question is, can you handle it?
The crowd here feels electric.
Stream every match of the UEFA Women's Champions League on Paramount+.
Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. The Coaching Carousel has indeed begun spinning, I should say, and it will spin very silly indeed. Later in the show, we're going to talk about the other 2 jobs that opened on Saturday, or on Sunday, I should say, when we go inside the Insiders. But guys, let's talk about where things stand with a couple of the big hitters that could come open on Sunday if things break poorly on the field. Obviously, let's start with Florida. Florida, Billy Napier, under the gun. Obviously, they lose to Mike Elko's Texas A&M. On Saturday, they play Mississippi State, which is absolutely a losable game because the Bulldogs are pretty good this season. And then they go into a bye week. A bye week is a typical time that you fire coaches because you can find an interim, you can sort of ease the interim in, and you can sort of make a medium-term plan for the rest of the season. So depending on how Saturday goes, yeah, it could be Billy Napier who gets his walking papers. Obviously, Napier has been under the gun, it seems like, for the last 18 months. He came in the last season, we knew what it was. And then DJ Lagway comes in for Grant Mertz, and they have a renaissance the back half of the season. Short of that, guys, it does not seem like Billy Napier will get out of jail here. And so we'll see what happens there. But that's just one of the biggest dominoes that could fall, John.
Yeah, I mean, you look around the landscape and, let some of you other guys weigh in on it. But, I mean, to me, it's Florida, Auburn, Wisconsin. Those, to me, are the 3 big potential dominoes in this current moment. Obviously, things can change. There's some guys who I think can play themselves on, play themselves off. But I think those are 3 of the ones that are of note. I think, they're all in different places. And I think what might be interesting is this is just my, looking at the schedule, it feels much more likely for Hugh Freeze to be able to win enough to hold on. It's not necessarily based on what we're seeing on the field, but that's more just based on what we're seeing on the schedule. I think there are people that feel like he has a chance to, win his way to keep that job. You guys probably saw John Cohen gave a comment to AL.com, Matt and Mai's former employer, which was a very weird analogy. Basically, like, sometimes you hope your car is going to start, and sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know if I'm Hugh Freeze, if I'm loving that analogy about how my coaching tenure is going, but that's kind of where things stand at Auburn right now. So I think they're hoping that the car keeps starting up, especially against Missouri, against Vanderbilt, some of those other games that feel winnable, but also you lose them if you're Hugh Freeze. And I talked to some people down there recently. There is already restlessness. I think if they cannot get some of these wins, it will really crank up.
I mean, the Auburn thing is just, it's always, like, you want to talk about a school where it's always something. It is always doggone something at Auburn. And this week, it seems like, and this is what kind of came, preceded the whatever vote of confidence you want to call last night, is this situation with Damari Alston, where it seems like Damari Alston wanted to redshirt, and Hugh and the staff were not exactly in favor of that. He's also been battling a shoulder injury, and it seems like that
Team
has
captain.
been, yes, team captain. That has been making some waves in the locker room. You've seen some of his teammates, especially in the running back room, tweet some things out and in social media, some stuff out that are sort of backing him. And Hugh, I think, quite frankly, stepped in it with how he messaged the decision, because yesterday when Hugh Freeze had his press conference and I was asked why Alston is no longer with the team, he basically made it sound like Alston had committed a rules violation or something like that. Like he had committed a crime or something. And I don't think that's that well.
Yeah,
Excuse me?
I hadn't even seen that part. I was going to say, without realizing that as you guys know, like it's not uncommon for head coaches to take this approach with guys that want to redshirt.
Yeah, I don't.
You decide you want a redshirt, then you're not going to be a part of the team moving forward. So that part is not uncommon.
It's also
the press conference part.
It's also in some contracts that deciding to do that is a rules violation of the team. I'm not saying the messaging was correct, but like
it's the
whole,
yeah.
like,
I think we can understand the decision, right? Damari Alston's camp is making the best decision for him, and Hugh Freeze is making the best decision for his team. I actually don't think the decision is that wild, to be honest with you. Like I get it. It's the messaging that got Hugh into hot water, and then Monday afternoon or Monday.
You could say the messaging is always what gets Hugh into hot water.
Yes, and then Monday evening he has to walk that back on his radio show and sort of clarify, apologize, yada 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 about that, and then John Cohen gives as John was saying, the vote of confidence is one way. But
pretty much what John was saying is that Hugh sometimes needs to freeze before he says some of the stuff that he says.
That's very true.
I think that would be smart.
We're gonna boo for that? Like, my lord.
I was expecting
a soundboard button to give us a boo. We'll work on that.
Can I say two things real quick? So, like, first of all, I had one thing to add with Penn State. One thing that's important to keep in mind with Penn State, just to backtrack to that for a second, think back to the 2021 coaching cycle. So the 2021 coaching cycle is what this is ultimately going to be in terms of jobs of note, the amount of just respectable jobs and high-level jobs that come open. That was the cycle where you had Notre Dame and USC and LSU, Florida, other ones to go along with that. You're going to see that same kind of quality this cycle, and it's going to be the most active and just craziest cycle since that point. But something else worth keeping in mind, just to go back to what we talked about with Penn State, is when it came to LSU, USC, think about who they hired. USC, Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma, a coach that at that time most people around the football space would have viewed as being untouchable, and then most likely wasn't leaving Oklahoma. LSU, who do they go out and hire? Brian Kelly, a coach that probably 99.9% of people around the football world wouldn't have thought would be leaving Notre Dame and probably viewed as being untouchable. But there are certain calibers of jobs, like we talked about, where you are capable of potentially stealing somebody away that most people may view as being untouchable. Penn State is one of those that could be capable of doing that. To go along with that, in terms of jobs coming up, John hit on a few of them. Auburn, I do think, has a chance to win enough that Hugh could get another year, though. So if you look at the schedule, it is realistic that they could be a 7+ win team, even in the regular season. And I think if he wins 7 games there, that there's at least a decent chance that ends up being safe. Some of the ones that John touched on, like Florida, Wisconsin. I mean, Wisconsin at this point is starting to feel more and more like a matter of when, not if. And frankly, on my end, I've been tracking that. It feels like each of the last few weeks in terms of a change potentially being made. Florida, another one where it feels like it's trending potentially in that direction. But there are also some wild card type deals that will be contingent on the second half of the season. So this one may have sounded crazy a week ago. And I'll emphasize, this is coming from industry sources, not like the ADs at these schools, but just stuff coming up from people around the industry. Oklahoma is one that
I knew you were going to say that.
Some people were paying attention to. So Brent going into this year, 2 of his first 3 seasons as head coach, he was 6-6 in the regular season. Starts this year 5-0. If he had gotten that win over Texas, we would have gotten a massive individual win. Would have also been 6-0 at that point.
And they haven't scored a touchdown against Texas in, 3 years?
The bigger issue is that 5-1 now, or lost that big individual game, and you head into remaining part of regular season schedule where 5 of the final 6 opponents for them are teams currently ranked in the top 16. The one that's not, South Carolina, and it's on the road. That's an extremely losable game. So even with Oklahoma starting 5-0, there's a real possibility here that this could end up being a team right around 500. And based on the expectations and standards that place has, that Oklahoma has, being 6-6 or somewhere in that range for the third time in 4 years, I think Brent could be in danger at that point. Another one where I'm
Well, can I just add one quick thing here to your point? Remember, new AD coming in too, right? So they hired a GM separate of Brent. They're having a new AD. They've got, what is it, a president of the AT&T guy. Like, that operation is very much set up that if they want to make a move, they could. I know that's one that I think all of us had kind of on our list before the season started. Keep an eye on this. And I think, Matt, you made a great point. But yeah, just not having a guy who hired you having the decision-making button, I think, is something that also plays into there might be some uneasiness there.
So 2 that I'm skeptical of in terms of change being made right now for different reasons are Florida State and Michigan State, but both are coming up in terms of, like, I know there are some unhappy people behind the scenes at both places, but with Florida State, the buyout is significant enough there that even with things trending in a bad direction right now, and even with some unhappy people behind the scenes, I just don't know if or if Florida State is going to be putting up that kind of money to move on from Norvell, even though it can say confidently that all of a sudden that seat is starting to get hot again, and the pressure is starting to pick up there based on how the year has progressed and gone since the win over Alabama. And then in terms of Michigan State, the reason they're skeptical with that is it's so early in Jonathan Smith's tenure there that I don't know if they would make a change already, but can tell you for a fact, just based on some of communication that I've had, including behind the scenes people in Michigan State, there are some unhappy people behind the scenes, and it's trending in a not great direction. Although it is important to note, it's so early enough in its time there that it makes me somewhat skeptical right now, even with all that being the case, that they would make a change right now.
Similar situation, new AD there. The guy, Jay Batt, the AD at Michigan State, not the one who hired Jonathan Smith. That can always be a factor.
Yeah. Those are and there's also plenty of down ballot jobs that all of us are watching. We're all watching Coastal Carolina. We're all watching Colorado State. But both of those two teams, I think, actually got wins.
Good win for Colorado State the other day.
It was.
They may have bought themselves some time.
Richard, can I throw out one job that I'm curious what people think about?
Please.
What do you guys think about Kentucky at this point?
I mean, that seems like it's going to be very interesting as far as, do you find a way to negotiate a lump sum and part ways? And maybe Mark Stoops kicks upstairs as like an ambassador, and he only has to come on campus like once a week and glad hand with some donors, and he gets to hang out at Keeneland or on the Bourbon Trail or wherever it is he wants to hang out. That's what I'd do if I was Mark Stoops. I just think that's a situation where you got to find some sort of momentum as a football program. And it just seems like a slow erosion over the last few years of Kentucky's identity. Kentucky was supposed to be, and classically when Stoops had it rolling, physical force. They were going to be a tough out, and they're not that anymore. And once you've eroded that physicality, you've eroded that identity for the football program, what do you have? That's my question with Kentucky right now under Mark Stoops. Is this just a situation where it's just properly run its course?
It's still crazy thinking how close we were to Mark Stoops being the head coach at Texas A&M. Like,
Mark Stoops was telling people he was the head coach at Texas A&M.
That's so crazy to think about. And a lot of people forget about that, how close we were to that happening. But two things. That's trending in a bad direction right now. But while that may be the case, Kentucky is not paying him $40 million to get rid of him, and he's not walking away from that.
There are a lot of numbers between 0 and 40 million.
You nailed it. That's what I was going to say. You bring up a fair point. They need to find a middle ground with a big lump sum if there's going to be any possibility of Mark leaving, because Mark is not walking away from that money.
Now, I could be wrong on this, but isn't it that it's already basically a lump sum? Isn't it due within 60 days? Isn't that part of? I thought that was part of. I could be wrong on this or misremembering. Sometimes it's like so many numbers in my head. You know,
number if it's not 40 million. Like if you're finding a middle ground, it better be a middle ground that Mark feels very good about for there to be any chance of that happening. If that's the road that they end up deciding to go down and try to figure out. That's more what I meant by that instead of just.
Yeah, no, I just think that sometimes one of the things that we forget about with these numbers, not us, but I think maybe the average viewer, maybe this is helpful, is that sometimes it's due within 30 days, 60 days. Sometimes it's kind of just like it's $1 million, $2 million, where it's much more palatable. And even there's been a lot of confusion just around the James Franklin number. And I still, don't know exactly the duty to mitigate, which can be a whole nother conversation, is kind of vague. And was talking to lawyers about this earlier today, but I think, well, from my understanding, I could be wrong. Maybe Mr. Typing over there, Chris Hummer, can look this up for me. But I believe that a good amount of that money is due within 60 days to Mark Stoops, which makes not only that number, which is huge, but it makes it particularly hard to swallow, knowing that you have to pay so much of it right away. And that was the case, I think, for Jimbo. A lot was due up front. I believe Gus Malzahn, half of it was due within 30 days. So just there's some of those where like not only is it a big number, but you got to pay so much that like you really have to find that money somewhere first. Like, all right, we got to find a way to spend $5 million over the next year and we'll spread it out.
Well, John, to your point, like I just want to use the two examples here. So it's just relevant given what we're talking about. Florida, they owe Billy Napier half the sum up front within 30 days. So that's about $10 million that have to be paid out right away. Wisconsin is the exact opposite. They can pay Luke Fickell monthly through 2032 to offset that money. So it really can make a big difference depending on how that is structured.
I just wonder how much different college football would be right now and how much different these two individual schools would be if Stoops had ended up at A&M, which obviously number 4 in the country right now under Mike Elko. And in that scenario, if he had gotten that job, John Summerall would be at Kentucky right now as the head coach at Kentucky. How much different would the outlook be or the results? Hey, how much different would they be right now if John Summerall was the coach compared to Mark Stoops? So it's funny how this kind of stuff works, but we'll see with Kentucky. I'm skeptical that there's going to be somebody different there coaching come next year, but at the same time, I was also extremely skeptical entering Sunday that there would be a different coach at Penn State in 2026, aside from James Franklin, let alone that they would make a move that day on Sunday. So we live in crazy times.
I'll never forget last year. I think it was the FAU job. I remember this very vividly. I called Matt and I was like, Matt, I think FAU's making a move like right now. And he was like, and he said that to me. He said what he just said to me. He's like, I'm very skeptical it's going to work. Like I've had some conversations, don't think it's going to work, blah, 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 blah. I got off the phone. I called somebody back. He called somebody back. And then we called each other back 10 minutes later. And we're like, oh, it's happening. And it moves. So I say all that to say that this stuff comes together so quickly. It comes together so quickly on Sunday mornings sometimes when it just blindsides us and we just don't see it coming.
Can I give a tiny bit? Well, maybe I'll save this for the next segment. I have some. So I talked to UAB's AD for a while the other day about kind of how they made the firing and stuff like that. It was insightful for me to know just kind of how much it truly is like how a team looks in a single game. And of course, it's much broader than that, but maybe that's a little tease for later. We can save it for Inside the Insiders.
Yeah, we call that in the business a tease. So when we come back on the College Football Insiders, we're going to go inside the Insiders with the other jobs that opened on Sunday morning.
You can always count on Sundays with the NFL on CBS and Paramount Plus. So even if you can't count on accurate expiration dates,
that is a rookie mistake,
or people appreciating your fashion sense,
Jim, the crowd is not on board here.
You can always count on Sundays with the NFL on CBS, streaming on Paramount Plus.
Glad we wear our good jerseys.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. All right, inside the Insiders to get us out of here on a Tuesday afternoon. The Oregon State job and the UAB job also open. So John, as he was saying before the break, was talking to UAB Athletic Director Mark Ingram, which, quite frankly, whether he's going to remain the athletic director is also another conversation for another day. But John, what did Mark let you in on about the nuts and bolts about how Trent Dilfer got out of the job?
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting. And I think sometimes you wonder, all right, is this a long premeditated thing? Is it impulsive? All those different things. And he basically let me down game by game during the season as to whether he was feeling good or bad about the situation. And it was just interesting that, of course, Trent came in with he needed to win this year. I think that was obvious. I think they wanted to see a bowl game happen this year. And it felt like it was at least a possibility based on their schedule. So I think that how the first 4 games played out were exactly how they thought they were going to play out. Now, you might want to look a little better in some of those games and whatnot, but that was about how they expected it to play out. Coming out of that, though, you lose to Army. That game was not particularly competitive. That was not great. And then the FAU game, there was a big priority on that one. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, did not watch a single minute of that game. There were a lot of other games that I was paying close attention to. And I almost was mad at myself for not paying attention to it, because he basically said, we looked atrocious in this game. Those are not his words. I'm paraphrasing. But basically, they did not look good in that game. We're down huge right off the bat. And it was okay, this is not getting fixed. I needed to see something in this game to believe that we would at least have a shot to make a bowl game coming out of this. And what I saw in this game was it's not changing. We have to make a move here. And so it was not off one game, but it was that one game that ultimately pushed him into, we cannot continue this anymore, which, to your point you made earlier, Richard, Mark is very tied to Trent. And so I kind of wondered whether he would want to make an in-season move, knowing that it was a very risky hire to hire him in the first place. But he felt like at that point, it's not changing. FAU as a first-year coach, we should basically be beating this team when we're in year 3 of our coach. And for us to not only lose, but look as poorly as we did in that game, to me, it felt like we could not move forward with Trent. And that was just, one of the fires that probably did not get nearly so much attention as it might have on a different Sunday because of Penn State, but was certainly a name that people know, and one that I think we kind of expected as a strong possibility headed into the season.
Well, John, you left something out with that. So, I didn't watch the game either, but we were texting in group text with the two of us and Trey Scott during the course of that game. And what did we talk about in terms of timeline? That expected this to happen. It was a matter of when, not if, but expected it to happen next week, not this week, because next week they face Memphis. They're going to lose to Memphis. They're going to be heavy underdogs in that game. And then guess what? They head into a bye after that.
Exactly.
And what's the natural time to make this kind of move? It's heading into a bye. So that was one that, frankly, had circled for next week in terms of going down. I was not expecting it to happen on Sunday, just knowing that for next week. And it was ugly. There's a reason that we were texting about it, that they were down 4 touchdowns or whatever it was in the first half, ended up losing by 20. And the score was, the game wasn't as close as the score and losing by 20 would indicate. But at the same time, that's why it caught me off guard a little bit that they did that, just knowing that they were a week away from the bye. And also, the other one that came open besides Penn State and UAB was Oregon State. Oregon State caught me by surprise also, because the record there is deceiving to a certain degree. 0-7, obviously terrible from a record standpoint. But at the same time, if you look a little bit deeper, the schedule that they have, 3 or 4 of the losses were to Power 4 teams. They took Houston, who's having a solid year this year, took Houston to overtime a few weeks ago, and have been relatively competitive even against P4 teams. But it seems like there was potentially some stuff behind the scenes there that may have contributed to
Oregon State Athletic Director Scott Barnes literally said that Trent Bray was not executing the CEO aspects of the job effectively. He told John Canzano that almost verbatim. I am paraphrasing, but he said that almost verbatim. There were some issues with them on the field operationally that were unbelievable. I mean, their special teams, some of the worst special teams you will ever see from a college. With you. And they fired a special teams coordinator, I believe, last week it was, or 2 weeks ago. But that obviously was not enough, because they, again, I think had a blocked kick or a kick blocked on Saturday in their game. And yes, that was simply too much. Oregon State's got bigger fish to fry too as an athletic department. I mean, it's as an athletic department and a university. They wrote a lot of checks and tried to do a lot of things facilities wise, just to name a few, expecting Pac-12 money, and then the league blew up. So
they're gonna go into the new Pac-12 and be a middle of the road team in the new Pac-12 in terms of resources. That's just the reality of their program. And I think the expectation, you can't have the expectations. I mean, obviously 0-7 is not good, but it's hard to have the expectations for Trent Bray you had when the resources are where they are. But that's just my opinion with a little bit of reporting mixed in.
It is important to note, by the way, like to go along with what Richard said about the AD and just his comments coming out of that, there are two sides to every story. And it just seems like overall there was a disconnect there, if that's the best way of summing it up, between Trent and administration and the AD there. And I think just like when I bring up the behind the scenes part of it, there are different things that can factor into these decisions. I think an AD being so open, talking about that part of it and being that harsh, where in most cases when a coach is fired, the AD puts out like the generic statement or whatever. It's not exactly common for an AD to put somebody on blast like that. Probably speaks to the relationship to a certain degree and could have factored into that one. But to piggyback off what Chris said with the Oregon State job and just reasonable expectations for them moving forward, John, this is a good thing for you to touch on. But we was talking to somebody with head coaching experience at the P4 level who I think would be a good fit, or a good person for UAB to at the very least look at and would have interest in that job. But one of the things that he brought up with it that is going to be necessary for UAB administration to get people comfortable with that they're talking to for that job is that they're going to upgrade from a resource and investment standpoint. So that coach that I'm referencing brought up that you have a clear top 5 at the very least in that conference in terms of resources and investment infrastructure, with the top 5 being USF, clear number 1 in the American in terms of that stuff. Memphis, number 2, probably. Tulane, UTSA, North Texas. There are going to be coaches that want to, at the very least, be in that North Texas type category in those areas to be comfortable taking this job. If UAB can get to that point and convince coaches that they're going to make those upgrades in terms of investment resources, once again, this is a job that has a lot of upside and could attract some really good candidates if, again, they can check those boxes with some of the people that they talk to. Wait, what are your thoughts on that? What have you gathered from?
Well, it's a good segue for me to drop another tease. I'll have a story hopefully tomorrow in CBS Sports about where UAB stands coming off of, what they tried to do versus where they go next. And I think, to your point, one of the reasons why they hired Trent Dilfer was the hope that in this current moment that they're in, that this guy can go out and raise money, basically in addition to being a football coach. He's a celebrity. They trotted him out at various donor dinners. They put him out to local business people. Like, we needed a guy who was sexy, basically, in some regard, to try to raise money because it's hard at UAB. And I think that what is going to be challenging for them is that I don't know that they are going to make a major additional investment. If you look at some of the numbers, just in terms of what UAB as an athletic department spends compared to a South Florida, for instance, it's less than half in terms of total dollars spent. So that's a pretty significant difference just within the American. I do think it is a potentially attractive job, but it's tough, and they're going to have to. I know that they're trying to raise money. I know that they are going to try to get additional dollars from the school, from an institutional standpoint. But traditionally, it has been very challenging at UAB. There's books that can probably be written about why they have not gotten as much money as some of the other places in such a football-heavy school, football-heavy state. But I will say, I do think, given how things went previously with Trent, I think you will see them go the opposite direction. I do think they would like to have a proven head coach. I would not be surprised to see them go the successful FCS route, maybe someone who has had success at that level where you think it might translate up the way it has with some other coaches like a Lance Leipold, Curt Cignetti, 2 of the most famous examples, but some other guys like that. That also, to me, signals maybe a little bit cheaper of a hire. That's just my own read on it. I'm not sure if that's how it plays out, but They're in a tricky spot, I think, in this current world. And we all go back to the Bill Clark days and how successful they were. And he did an amazing job. I was there for all of it. But I think it's a lot harder for UAB to succeed in this current world than the one that Bill Clark had so much success in.
Yeah,
I'm saying that Jordan Palmer is not going to be the hire at UAB. So, great breaking news, John.
I think that most importantly, like Matt bringing up the 2021 coaching cycle is actually a really, really interesting point, as he did earlier in the show, because that 2021 cycle is just a different world from this one, as far as the disparity in where the G5s are and where even your bad P4s are. Like, and Chris, you could check me on this, but like, even like a bad P4 roster is still running out there at 11, 12, $13 million total. There are not many G5 rosters that are more than $5 million. Not many.
If you go ahead and look at the standings and the G5, you can tell which rosters are spending that much money right now. It's not hard to figure it out, and it's a handful of them. And I mean, I'm not trying to spin the subject off, but I'm writing about the idea of parity in college football later this week and how we're seeing it coalesce at kind of the top of the sport flatten and the middle of the sport come up. But with that, there's a lot of schools on the G5 level coming down because their rosters are getting rated. So it is harder to win consistently on the G5 level because you don't have the money and you can't keep your players. And most of these schools, including a UAB, have had a hard time keeping their players in place since 2021.
Yeah. All right, guys, we will continue. Obviously,
none of you guys can see that. I think Matt is doing some one-handed typing right now. Pretty impressive.
Look, that's why he's the best in the business. We'll obviously continue to track the machinations, the ups and the downs of the coaching cycle. This is going to be one of the wildest coaching cycles that any of us can remember. Stick and stay with us on the College Football Insiders for all of your needs as far as the coaching cycle is concerned. We'll be back Thursday. I'm your host, Richard Johnson, joined by John Talty, Chris Hummer, and a tardy as always, Matt Zenitz. We'll see you Thursday.